Lord of the Mysteries. Chapter 1154. I'll give you a chance. The path that was formed by dusk didn't seem to contain anything, but after Amon and Klein landed one after another, they didn't continue falling, as though they were walking on the ground. This time, Amon didn't steal the distance. Instead, he brought Klein along as they approached the majestic projection of the giant king's court. From time to time, he would observe and admire the beautiful scenery. Walking above the sea of clouds, they walked along a sunset bridge with the legendary palace in the distance. It was supposed to be a joyful and refreshing matter, but Klein felt as though he was walking into the abyss, doing so one step at a time. The more he struggled, the deeper he fell. Once he entered the forsaken land of the gods, many things that he relied on would be useless. Before long, Amon and Klein arrived at the projection of the giant king's court and stood in front of the tallest building. On one side of the building was a steeple, and on the other side was a spire. The main door was far more than 10 meters tall, with it being mainly a grayish-blue color. It was covered with symbols, labels, and patterns. It was where the giant king lived, the place where Dark Angel Sasser slept. Klein glanced at the pitch-black hole to the left of the door, roughly determining that the door in the dream didn't need a key to open. Otherwise, the true Creator's believers wouldn't have been able to pass through. After all, the actual key back then was in Vice Admiral Iceberg's collection room. Next, we'll be able to enter the forsaken land of the gods once the door is opened. However, we'll definitely attract the attention of others by doing so. Amon chortled and took a few steps diagonally to the edge of the door. We won't open the door, but instead directly head over. As he spoke, the Angel of Time raised his hand to adjust his monocle. A dark blue color appeared in the corner of the grayish-blue door. It was an illusory door without any sense of being corporeal. The door-opening power of an apprentice is a very low-level ability, but it's perfect when used here. Amon lowered his right hand and introduced in satisfaction. Taking 2 steps, he passed through the illusory door. There are no useless beyonder powers, only useless beyonders. If I directly push the door open, I'll draw the attention of others. But from who? The true Creator? His holy residence, his divine kingdom should be somewhere in the forsaken land of the gods. If I can lure him over and let him clash with Amon, I might be able to find a chance to escape. Without any ability to control himself, Klein followed behind Amon without leaving much of a gap, stepping into the blurry dark blue door. The moment he stepped through, he felt the world spin around him. Even his spirituality seemed to be torn apart. After the abnormality disappeared and his condition was restored, he realized that he was on a beach that was soaked in the glow of the sunset. The sand and stones here were all black in color. Deep blue waves surged over from afar as they crashed into the coast, one wave after another, but they didn't produce any sounds like they should have. They were quiet, like a grand illusion. This sea is an illusion. Coming in would probably result in one appearing here, but it's not necessarily the case for leaving. According to the principle of reciprocity, if one wants to leave, they can only open the residence of the giant king, where Dark Angel Sasser is in deep sleep. With a sudden realization, Klein turned his head and looked in another direction. It was a mountain bathed in dusk. On it were countless palaces, towers, and many majestic city walls. This was the legendary giant king's court. Even if the city of silver could find a path that leads to the beach, it would be meaningless. From the corner of his eye, he saw that Amon had changed his image. He wore a black classical robe and a pointed hat of the same color. He changed from being a gentleman from the present era to an ancient mage that originated from the 4th or even the 3rd epoch. With a thought, Klein continued looking at the giant king's court, which wasn't too far away. He casually said, "Dark Angel Sasser is sleeping in the palace of the giant king." Amon stood to his side as he looked in the same direction and said without any change in expression, "I know. I've entered the giant king's court, and even visited the graves of Ormer's parents." As expected, one of Klein's guesses was finally confirmed. He deliberated and said, "What answers are you searching for? You can make a guess." Aman continued looking at the giant king's court and laughed. "If I had any idea, I wouldn't need to ask you." After thinking for a few seconds, he said, "Some secrets of the first epoch? You can say that." Aman replied without much concern. Klein hesitated for a moment before saying, "Aren't you curious about Dark Angel Sasser's condition?" "I am." Aman didn't change the direction of his gaze as he said with a smile, "But compared to me, there are still many people who are more interested in that. My zealous brother, the Hangman, the Dragon of Betrayal, as well as Evernight, Storm, and White. I want to see who's the first one who isn't able to hold back. Heh, if I can steal everything of importance inside at the critical moment, their expressions will definitely be very interesting." This thought. The reason for stirring up such a huge matter was purely to cause trouble, to gain some excitement? Klein frowned slightly and realized that Aman's values were different from that of humans. This is a natural mythical creature. Completely different from humans. Why can I frown on my own? Just as he came to a realization, he sensed that something was missing in his body. He subconsciously turned his head to look at blasphemer Aman. There was a semi-translucent worm of time with 12 rings in Aman's hand. He smiled as he looked into Klein's eyes and said with some anticipation, "Since we've already arrived at the forsaken land of the gods, there's no need to worry about external interference. I'll give you a chance. Before I reach my true destination, I will no longer parasitize you. You can use every method that you can think of to escape, and I will try my best to stop you. Good luck. Don't disappoint me." For a moment, Klein couldn't believe what Aman had just said. He suspected that Aman was bluffing him. But when he thought of Aman's behavior all this while, he felt that it was something that was in line with his character. "All right." As his thoughts raced, he took a deep breath and solemnly replied under the orange glow of the sunset. Backlund, Parliament House. Due to King George III's sudden self-destruction, none of the nobles and members of Parliament were allowed to return to their respective homes. Instead, they were gathered here to receive heavy protection from the 3 churches and the military. Dressed in a pure black dress, Audrey stood behind the railing on the 2nd floor and quietly looked down. As the matter had happened too suddenly and lacked any prior warning, she still found it surreal despite receiving some indication from the world Gehrman Sparrow. She seemed to have transcended reality and was watching a performance. Her father, brother, and the other nobles and members of Parliament were gathered in cliques as they occupied different small rooms. From time to time, one would walk out of the small room, bringing with them the stench of smoke and their gentlemanly attire as they rushed to another discussion circle. The ladies and madams sat in the lounge. Most of them had yet to return to their senses as their eyes were dazed and their bodies trembling. The parliamentary staff and the military's middle and low-ranking officers were running about everywhere, transmitting information from different places. A soldier dressed in a red shirt and white pants walked in from the outside and handed a stack of paper to the officer in charge of the hall. The officer glanced at it and immediately called for his assistant. He pointed at the small room where Earl Hall and the rest were in. Without asking anything, the adjutant took the documents and ran towards his destination. All of this happened in a very quiet environment. Only the sound of footsteps and faint whispers echoed in the air. It was as if it was a huge oil painting drawn on the canvas of the real world. The gorgeous decorations, dark colors, dim lights, and the expressions on everyone's faces created an extremely heavy atmosphere. Audrey pursed her lips slightly and looked at it for a while. Her mood was still at a nadir, and she only managed to maintain her calm by relying on placate. Why would Mr. World deal with the king? The death of the king will definitely bring deep hatred. It doesn't matter what sequence the king is, because he has never shown it. This doesn't affect the overall strength of the kingdom, but this incident is enough to explain one thing: the 3 churches, royal family, and military have fractured apart. The internal strife is quite serious. The situation with Lone will be very dangerous. Its enemies will definitely not let this opportunity go. As her thoughts raced, she saw a man in a black coat rush into Parliament House. He suppressed his voice and started talking to the officer in charge of the lobby. As an experienced spectator who could observe the subtle expressions and body language, reading lips was undoubtedly Audrey's strength. As she watched, she interpreted the corresponding content. Intis has used the excuse of conflict in the borders of the Hornacis mountain range to gather a large number of troops there. Audrey bit her lip lightly as that familiar feeling of not belonging there arose again. It was as if she had seen a novel's description play out in the real world. The grayness of the sky seemed to grow thicker. No one spoke in the house where the Morettas lived. Benson stood behind the oriel window with a solemn expression as he looked at the people rushing down the streets. It was unknown what he was thinking. Melissa sat on the sofa beside the coffee table. She lowered her head and looked at the crude machinery she made. It was as if she had become a statue. Sigh, the situation has become even more chaotic. Benson exhaled as he touched his hairline. He turned his head back and forced a smile. Regardless, Backlund is definitely safer than most places. Melissa didn't raise her head. Instead, she said with an ethereal voice, Klein found a good job, and our lives gradually improved. In the end, an accident took him away. We moved out of Tingen, and you got a job as a civil servant. I entered university and started on the correct path. In the end, war broke out. It wasn't easy for us to get used to this environment. We were praying that the war would end early. In the end, the king was blown to pieces. Having said that, Melissa slowly lifted her head and looked at her brother with a confused expression. Benson, is it that difficult to obtain and maintain a better life than what we had before?